Right, we're starting our third critical panel called Beyond Human. And our first speaker is Anna Kérchy. Am I pronouncing that right? I'm sorry.
Yes,
yeah.
Perfect.
Anna Kérchy, who is an associate professor in English literature and head of the doctoral program in literature at the English department of the University of, Szeged?
Szeged.
Szeged, sorry, in Hungary. I should have asked before. Anyway. Yes, please start, please, Anna.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. Today I will be talking about post-humanist philosophy and humanimal ethics in Angela Carter's Wonder Tales and contemporary feminist body art potentially inspired by her work. I'm trying to move between my slides. Okay, here we go, hopefully. Hope you can. Can you see my second slide?
Is it a bird woman?
Yes, a bird woman. Okay, and some text. Okay, thank you. So Angela Carter's demythologizing business has been celebrated for fusing revolutionary poetics and politics by conjoining a postmodern narratological destabilization with a socialist feminist critique of hegemonic power structures. However, one can also argue that her democratizing intent goes way beyond the humanist egalitarian agenda. She can also be considered as a precursor of post-humanist philosophers. The Cartesian Wonder Tales leitmotifs of humanimal metamorphosis, cathartic interspecies encounters, of a sentient, sensual, enchanted woods, all test the limits of human embodiment and cognition, and express an interest in the lived experiences of non-human entities, through a play with non-anthropocentric refocalization. The thematization of the transgression of the fragile borderline between human and animal, human and plant, human and object does not only challenge the species' supremacy of humans over other life forms, but also examines the ethical implications of extending subjectivities beyond humankind and looks into symbiotic and parasitic modes of cohabitation. This post-humanist agenda holds linguistic implications too. The exuberant rhetorics of Cartesian fiction self-ironically reflects on humans' joyous revelry in lyricism despite awareness of the limitations of verbal representation, while the strategic somatization of semioticization, that is when corporeal energies invade the text through rhyme, rhythm, repetition, the vocal, acoustic, kinetic qualities of language Julia Kristeva referred to as the revolutionary plasticity, this might be an attempt to surpass verbalization and to get in touch with the dynamic vitality of the life word. I wish to suggest that Carter's legacy lives on through contemporary feminist body artists' humanimal-themed performances, which revitalize the Cartesian post-humanist spirit. Although Wonder Tale is often used interchangeably with the terms folk tale, fairy tale, and Märchen, it refers to a specific subcategory of tales of magic, which focus on awe-inducing marvelous transformations. Vladimir Prop traces back the common morphology of Wonder Tale to the pattern of the initiation rite and the archetypal myth of the dragon slayer, whereby the dragon is a paradigmatic image of cyclical temporality, time forever rewinding itself through periodic death and rebirth, a timeless trope of ontological transformation and regeneration. Svetlana Todorov's structuralist analysis defines Wonder Tales, Volshabnaya Сказка, along the lines of a recurring plot pattern that coincides with the major steps of the Campbellian hero's journey: villainy initiating adventures, departure from home, encounter with a donor providing a magic agent that helps the hero accomplish his quest and return to an unfamiliarly familiar home. Jack Zipes, on the other hand, differentiates between the literary fairy tale and the oral wonder tale by emphasizing the effective reactions induced by the genre, highlighting that these tales evoke wonder but also hope for change, complementing their apparent escapism with a social, critical, political intent, inviting us to marvel about the workings of the universe where anything can happen at any time, and these fortunate and unfortunate events are never really explained. Angela Carter's recycling of the fairy tale genre is guided by the motto to pour new wine into old bottles to make old bottles explode. a postmodern deconstructive agenda to undo mythical tropes fossilized into tired old cultural cliches, to disclose the ideological biases of conventional happy endings resonating with normatively prescribed identity scripts, sexist, racist, classist, ableist, and speciesist scenarios, and to self-ironically reflect on our entrapment within the fairy tale tradition, predetermining the collective cultural imagination of the Western world. But it also highlights the subversive intents lurking within that very same tradition, unjustly relegated to the nursery sphere, and the pedagogical intents throughout its 19th century canonization and grimmification. The buzzwords of Carter's tales are fantasy, pastiche, parody, play, politics, and yet her story words preserve a sense of enchantment, an element of primordial magic, of rudimentary creative energies. She links in her foreword to the Virago Book of Fairy Tales to the oral tradition of folk tales, representing the most vital connection we have with the imagination of the ordinary men and women whose labor created our world. As Lorna Sage put it, for Carter, fairy tales and her revisionary analysis of fairy tales offered a way of knowing the world and a means of self-knowledge. Through meta-imaginative implications, a way of learning about our way of learning about the world. Carter had a penchant for recycling wonder tale leitmotifs and toposes. Her major themes include initiation, rites, identity crisis, liminal states of being, death in life, rebirth, metamorphosis, spatial dislocations through a flânerie with gusto in heterotopic and carnivalesque spaces, built environment like the circus, the Toyshop, the vaudeville theatre, or the puppet show, dreamscapes, and natural sites which deprive us of our sense of rational direction and orientation, like the enchanted woods, and in a metafictional vein, overall, the labyrinthine textuality itself. She is also fond of thematizing temporal confusion, instances of cyclical, deadened, or enchanted time, midnight, New Year's Eve, solstice, the freeze-frame moment when the grandfather's clock stops, déjà vu, jamais vu, presque vu, a sense of almost there-ness, epiphanic time zones when human being must realize that we are dwelling in a universe that is beyond the means of human measurability. These crisis states lead to ontological transformations and regenerations and an epistemological crisis, as the violent affrontation with otherness makes us realize that we are all different in different ways. I wish to suggest here that these features of wonder tales permeating and predetermining Carterian fiction, her rewriting of tales, resonate particularly well with the major ideas of posthumanist philosophy that urges us to debunk myths of human exceptionalism, to revise our anthropocentric biases for the sake of reimagining and creating more mutually satisfying interspecies cohabitations. This is what feminist philosopher Donna Haraway refers to as the chimerical vision of diverse bodies, subjectivities, perspectives, and meanings co-shaping one another in situated yet inalienably interconnected nature cultures, where humans and non-humans, that is plants, animals, things, and cyborgs alike, conceive of themselves as equally important parts of the same litter, mutually benefiting from their cohabitation as companion species, bonded in a significant otherness as messmates in a multi-partner mud dance. Haraway's language is also very poetic. This idea of taking otherness as a starting point for self-definition in a relational model of identity politics is definitely a recurring thought experience in Carterian fiction. In her revitalization of the wonder tale genre, embracing the other surpasses the confines of humanity and celebrates surprising new constellations of humanimal metamorphosis and chimeric cohabitations. Resulting from the narratological structure of wonder tales, unpredictable chance is a predictable plot organizing device of the genre, and as a result, the wisdom learned from these stories often makes us realize our ignorance by making us recognize the unknowability of the word. However, this partial perspective can become a liberating experience as reframed in terms of an ethics of wonder, which feminist philosopher Margaret Lacaze defined as a generous respect and a non-possessive desire for what or who we cannot fully understand. An idea that resonates with the post-humanist call to refocalize our gaze and look beyond the anthropocentric perspective. I will just mention a few examples from the many examples from Carter's fiction for the fictional reformulation of these theoretical agendas or political claims. The animal husband tales from the Bloody Chamber volume refuse the traditional closure of the wonder tale subgenre that conventionally identifies happy ending with the breaking of the magic spell, resulting in the transformation of the cursed animal-shaped partner back into a human form that would presumably re-establish the normal status quo and guarantee a happily ever after for the matching couple. The Cartesian interspecies romance does not end with this conflict resolution, but rather embraces the differences within the self-same. And there are different ways of realizing this kind of a subversion of the genre. One of them is mockingly diverting the partner's positionalities in order to challenge the conventional hierarchization, as in the finale of The Company of Wolves, that subverts the human, animal, good, evil, victim, victimizer positionalities with the figures of the wolfish Red Riding Hood and the tender wolf. The werewolf is already a transitional figure. Midnight and the clock strikes, it's Christmas Day, the werewolf's birthday, the door of the solstice still wide enough to let them all sing through. See, sweet and sound, she sleeps in Granny's bed between the paws of a tender wolf. It's a mock role reversal, as the partners do not change places in the sense of the human becoming animal and the animal becoming human, but they reveal within themselves different aspects of their personalities they normally associate with the otherness doomed to repression. Sleeping in Granny's bed clearly suggests the rejection of a patriarchal heritage of identity formation grounded in exclusion. And at the same time, this is a troubling text because it cunningly combines a somewhat kitsch idyll based on the romantic tropes of the tamed beast and the love changes everything, with a second-wave feminist agenda celebrating women's sexual agency informed by a Foucauldian recognition of the codependence of limits and transgression, and also a zoophiliac rape fantasy, a sort of precursor of today's furry fandom online subculture. Another option for subverting the wonder tale genre and the animal husband genre is preserving the animal-human partnership as a democratic union of complementary entities. For Carter, a metaphor of vindicating gender equality is the annihilation of the predator-prey distinction. At the end of the courtship of Mr. Lion, the beast who fell ill and refused to consume meat and hence condemned himself to passive vegetation in Beauty's absence recovers when Beauty returns and is finally ready to dine together. "Do you know," said Mr. Lion, "I think I might be able to manage a little breakfast, Beauty, if you could eat something with me." Mr. and Mrs. Lion walk in the garden, the old spaniel drowses on the grass, in the drift of fallen petals. Although the dilemma remains unresolved whether they will consume a carnivorous or a vegetarian diet, so in a Blakean sense, is it songs of innocence or experience, but in this interspecies symbiosis is brought to full realization with the apparently harmonious cohabitation of human, beast, and pet animal. A third form of alternative happy ending is the humanimal metamorphosis when the human turns into animal to match the bestial bride. Unlike in the classic mythological or folktale scenarios therianthropy, the shape-shifting from human to animal, here it's not a curse, a punishment from gods or illness or a last desperate chance of survival, a way of escaping tragic destinies, like when Daphne turns into a laurel tree in order to escape Zeus's raping her. But it's a celebration of the liberation of the untamed, unruly, passionate aspect of femininity conventionally identified with passivity. The critique of the ideology of engendering works on multiple levels in Carter's fiction. The Tiger's Bride, that was already mentioned several times today, an excellent analysis, but The Tiger's Bride can be regarded as a true twin text of the Sadian Demon. as beauty, who is reduced to an object of exchange between men, according to the patriarchal kinship system described by cultural anthropologist Levi-Strauss, becomes a narrator focalizer and an agent of revolt and transformation who speculates about the similarity of women and animals who are equally deprived of their rights, agency, and subjectivity, which are regarded as masculine privileges in an androcentric culture. In a final poetic passage, a metaphor of sexual awakening and self-discovery, beauty decides to shed her skin, to denude herself, and to embrace her tigerish self. This erotic passage is exciting because it manages to fully reject the traditionally objectifying interpretations of female embodiment. It eludes the fetishizing male gaze, the pathologizing medical gaze, the aestheticizing museal gaze, and the demonizing speciesist gaze alike. This is a feminist body writing at its best, when the emphasis on tactile sense impressions presupposes an equal relationality between partners. We have all these words referring to tactility and touching, and this is something that refutes the hierarchical distinction of the visual economy of power, the onlooker and the looked at distinction, because when you touch, you are also touched. And from a corporeal narratological perspective, even the reader will be somatically involved and touched by the book experience. So the humanimal metamorphosis allows for the expression of queer desire. Being in the wrong body, skin shedding, shape-shifting can be associated with transgender embodiment. Non-productive, anarchic, self-annihilating, ecstatic sexual energies of a non-penetrative, non-phallogocentric mode of sexuality, a free flow of libidinal drives beyond all binaries, human, animal, male, female, active, passive, and raw and cooked, are emerging here through a sublime objectification of the subject. We can also mention vegetal transformations and plant metamorphosis in Carter's fiction, as at the end of The Lady of House of Love, when the vampire lady, Nosferatu's daughter, transforms into a red rose. It's an ambiguous open ending because it's difficult to tell if it's the down-to-earth rationality of the young tourist arriving on a bike to her castle that manages to disenchant her cursed power, so that the floral transformation should be interpreted as a taming of her bestiality, or if the rose he takes with him to the trenches of the First World War is actually a harbinger, if not a provocative agent of a historical cataclysm that will result in the death of 9 million soldiers. The dark, fanged rose she plucked from between her thighs like a flower laid on a grave might not be her grave, but that of humanity, dooming itself to self-annihilation in a global-scale warfare. And that's an interesting, I don't have time to discuss that, but here it's a possibility that it's not even the post-human, but the a-human aspect might be emerging in Carter's fiction. As the reeling ardor of a glowing velvet monstrous flower whose petals regained all their former bloom and elasticity, their corrupt brilliant beautiful splendor infiltrate the corridors of the barracks, the flower reminds us of the fatal symbol of the vagina dentata too, and plant horror may be a harbinger of the end of the Anthropocene. The Countess turned rose is a hybrid figure because as a vampire she dreams of becoming human, and she represents her yearning with an animal metaphor. Can a bird only sing the songs it knows, or can it learn a new song? And eventually it transforms into a plant. This hybridity is also something that characterizes the King. He is one of those characters who is born from the desires of the woods and is also this kind of a in-between interspecies creature. Finally, I wish to mention a few feminist body artists whose humanimal performances are resonating with the post-humanist environmental philosophical messages of Carterian wonder tales. Body art performances experiment in provocative, transgressive ways with a human body that becomes simultaneously an instrument, a medium, an agent, and also an end product of artistic creation. They invite calculated corporeal reactions from audiences in a multitude of perceptually, affectively, and politically engaging ways. Body art is basically rooted in avant-garde performance arts, but from the 1970s on, with the emergence of the animal rights movements, there has been a growing dissatisfaction with the anthropocentric perspective of carnal art that entailed a shift towards humanimal poetics and politics. This change of focus from humanoid embodiment to interspecies relationalities and post-human unworthiness marks a major paradigm shift of body art. The three examples I'd like to mention here make no explicit reference to Carter's works, but I think through an associative logic, we can easily call them sort of intermediate adaptations and twin texts to Cartesian wonder tales that resonate that message that Carter leaves us about post-humanist ethics and these ideas. So Eleanor Morgan's recent body art performance plays with the blurring of human and animal bodily boundaries through gently letting herself be entangled in the web home of a spider. In a soothing 6 minutes long video artwork entitled Serenading Spiders, she sings to a spider who is connected to her body with a spider web extruded from its spinneret. The Morgan's piece recalls the mythological significance attributed to weaving, from the fatal Moira's controlling the thread of life to Ariadne's thread showing the way out of the Minotaur's labyrinth. We can think a whole lot of things. She pays homage to the centuries-long entanglements between humans and spiders and acknowledges Arachnida's manifold artistic skills, their architectural design and musical talents. And she explores what happens when one art-making animal meets another. The spider web is also an emblem of body art, simultaneously a nest, a trap, excluded from the animal artist's carnal interior. My second example is Marianne Laval-Janter's humanimal body art project. Okay, I will finish. May the horse live in me, that blurs interspecies boundaries in radical ways through a unique scientific, aesthetic, and cultural bioanthropological experimentation with the idea of blood brotherhood. The artist is injected with different horse immunoglobulins over the course of several months to build up tolerance against the alien entity. And then she's injected with horse blood, plasma, while she's wearing a set of stilts with hooves on the end to feel at one with the horse. And she walks around with the donor horse in this communication ritual before having her hybrid blood extracted and freeze-dried. She reflects on the transcending of her human confines in ecstatic terms. I had the feeling of being superhuman. I was not normal in my body. I couldn't sleep and I felt a little bit like a horse, hyper-powerful, hypersensitive, and hyper-nervous. So she celebrates this nervous agility of the horse she unites with as a mythical reincarnation of the centaur, but it's also, apart from these old-fashioned theatrical props, there is this, with the prosthetic implants and the blood transfusion, there is this techno-scientific edge to her work. And the final example and the closing lines have to do with Samantha Sweeting's work on human-animal communication that is very much influenced by and informed by folk and fairy tales and mythology. She produces a controversial body of work Catriona Macara calls a series of lactation narratives, in which she appears to be breastfeeding kittens, lambs, and humans. Her sources of inspiration are Marina Warner's From Breeze to the Blonde, but also the myths of Romulus and Remus, suckled by a she-wolf, and Kristeva's feminist psychoanalytical theory of the objectification of motherhood. And in this archival photograph entitled In Came the Lamb, she documents her apparently nursing a lamb, and the performance, of course, refers to this nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb, about a little girl who breaks the rules, and then the human-animal relation is eroticized here, as Macara says, the torture of bestiality is obscured here, overwritten by an aesthetics of care. But this interspecies confusion about how we abuse the breast milk of cows for human consumption also comes into picture, and also there is a profanation of pious imagery of the biblical iconography of the Virgin Mary, where the baby Jesus is replaced by a simple farm animal. Although Sweeting's work was criticized by many as tasteless She manages to debunk harmful myths of femininity and to call attention to a sense of connectedness, and to embrace what Kerry Wolf calls a shared animal condition as the foundation for post-human ethics, transspeciesism underpinned by compassion. And I think this is an idea that was also celebrated in Carter's One Goddess fiction. Thank you very much. I'll try to.
Sorry, I was moving things around and now I've lost the mic. There we go. Okay, thank you so much, Anna. And I'm going to bring Wiem to the floor. Dr. Wiem Krifa is an assistant professor of English literature at the English department at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities of Tunisia. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Well, first I'd like to thank you for such an organization, perfect organization of the conference, and I congratulate the organizers for the success of the conference. Okay, my presentation is entitled The Deconstruction of Myths in Angela Carter's Nights at the Circus and the Magic Toy Shop. Okay. To start, Angela Carter's re-exploitation of the Greek myth Leda and the Swan represents one way of feminist deconstructive reading of traditional patriarchal myths. In both her novels, The Magic Toy Shop and Nights at the Circus, she deconstructs and parodies the myth as a prior step before transforming it into a more successful feminist project through which she studies the thread between performance, the process of identity construction, and accordingly, the definition of gender. Rewrite Leda and the Swan represents an important part of Carter's project of demythologizing. The Greek myth has been explored by various poets and writers before Carter, notably William Yeats, to reinforce its mythic grandeur and accentuate its ideological tone. However, Carter's reuse of Leda and the Swan is unique in that it targets the deconstruction of a set of ideologies and literary movements that help it to anchor gender inequalities. This presentation will explore Carter's intertextual and periodic study of the Greek myth of Leda and the Swan in her novels, as I have said, The Magic Toy Shop and Nights at the Circus, corroborating the role performance plays in defining the character's gender and identity. In each book, the writer tackles the myth from different thematic, textual, and physical performances. In The Magic Toy Shop, Carter uses and abuses the myth for the sake of deconstructing the patriarchal power and attaining gender equality. Contrary to the Greek myth, which sets forth the Swan as violent with its desire to injust and dare the other, Carter's Swan defies patriarchy and resists Uncle Philip's plan to violate Melanie. Finn, who acts as the Swan, unveils his brother-in-law's intention and joins efforts with Melanie to literally and symbolically deconstruct the Swan, the incarnation of the Greek god Almighty Jove. As such, through his parodic performance of the myth, Finn chooses to denounce the role of the atrocious patriarchal male, whereby acquiring the new man's identity. In her book Nights at the Circus, the writer borrows the Swan's physical features to design her female heroine, Feathers, who typifies a mixture of female and masculine physical characteristics, thus defying the traditional divisions of gender binary divisions. Feathers bears both human and mythic masculine traits to surmount the previous submissive female categories. The deconstruction of myths is thus at the forefront of Carter's feminist agenda. As she proclaims, I quote, "Myths deal in false universes to dull the pain of particular circumstances, and no area is that more true in that of relations between the sexes," end of quote. Her feminist project of mythic deconstruction is clearly stated also when she avers, "I am in the demythologizing business and aims at exposing myths and their oppressive potential, particularly in the field of gender relations." Its poem unveils the sexual political implications of the myth. Leda is depicted as a passive female who succumbs to her rape by Almighty Jove, visiting her disguised as a swan. Male dominance is widespread in its poem and accentuates female submission. In Carter's books, however, the female characters, together with the males, are empowered to deconstruct the patriarchal dominance. The writer designs a strong and liberated females who strive to achieve gender equality. In The Magic Toy Shop, Melanie is forced by her uncle Philip to play the role of leader, together with Finn as the swan. I quote from The Magic Toy Shop, "Well, I must lie down," she thought, like fate or the clock. On came the swan, its feet going splat, splat, splat. She thought if she did not act her part well, a trapdoor in the swan's side might open and an armed host of pygmy Uncle Philips, all clockwork, might rush out and savage her. End of quote. Melanie struggles to surmount her objectification by laughing and ironically undermining the swan's estates. She succeeds to certain extents to overthrow the power of patriarchy by deconstructing the myth, though overwhelmed by fear and hopelessness. The obscene performance reveals the obscenity of the original myth with its emphasis on the physical and sexual exploitation of both passive female characters, Leda in the original myth and Melanie in the performed version of the myth. In both mythic versions, the cynical scenes are directed and guided by violently depicted male figures, whether the god figure, Jove, in the authentic myth, or Uncle Philip, the puppet maker, in the second performed show. Actually, Carter's choice of the puppet maker as an authoritarian figure is ironic and allusive to the mythic god who sexually exploited Leda. Similar to the god, Uncle Philip molds his family members and shapes them to satiate his thirst for revenge from Melanie's dead father, added to his unconscious sublimation of his misogynist patriarchal attitude. What's innovative as far as Carter's deconstructive rewriting of the myth is the victimization of Finn, who is supposed to be the violent swan. Finn epitomizes the new man who believes in gender equality and helps to overthrow Uncle Philip's planned conspiracy. The latter exercises his tyranny over the females of his household and his brothers-in-law equally. It's important to note that Carter's deconstruction of the myth is realized not only by her female heroine, but also by Finn, who embodies the new man. When he fails to perform the role of the rapist swan, he's beaten by Uncle Philip in the presence of all family members. Uncle Philip's internalized male ideology parallels the myth of women's passive sexuality, which is embedded within Yeats' original poem. However, contrary to the Greek Leda, who accepts the swan's violation, Melanie scorns and undervalues the swan. Uncle Philip's swan, who is supposed to violate Melanie, proves to be a trope for his patriarchal power trip. Carter designs an ironic version of the patriarchal swan, alluding to Uncle Philip as a parodied male figure. As critic Sarah Gamble proclaims, she aims to depict him as a parody patriarch who rules over a shadow world. End of quotation. His claimed patriarchal authority is defied by both Melanie and Finn, the embodiment of the swan. His patriarchal domination is limited to his own puppets in his toy shop and fails to extend to his niece Melanie. For the feminist postmodern writers, myths are patriarchal tools designed to limit the female freedom and relegate women to an inferior position compared to their male counterparts. Melanie unbridles her female self from the mythic chains and challenges the patriarchal ideology. Similarly, Finn cuts with the patriarchal heritage and builds a new identity by choosing a different performance from the one prepared by Uncle Philip. By refusing to play the role of the savage swan, Finn resists his brother-in-law's plan to violate Melanie. Following the show, Finn reveals to Melanie, quote, "You see, it was his fault. I'm not having any. I'm not going to do what he wants." End of quote. Uncle Philip's wicked behavior yields the revolution of his family members. Finn is no longer the passive obedient man, since he insurrects and defies the will of the god figure and goes further to destroy the swan, the symbol of Uncle Philip's masculine power, although he knows in advance the punishment that will befall him. Instead of throwing it in the dustbin, he prefers to burn the swan in the pleasure garden. Hence, covert resistance turns into direct rebellion when Finn destroys Uncle Philip's puppet swan. He buries the pieces of the swan in a derelict park that had been established in 1852 to house and celebrate the achievements of Victorian capitalism. A fallen state of Queen Victoria, snapped in two, lies in the park. The place is very symbolic since it hosts ancient monuments together with the fallen statue of the Queen, which stands for pagan values, an ideology similar to the patriarchal tenets embraced by Uncle Philip. The demolition and burial of the swan in the monumental park epitomized the downfall of Uncle Philip's patriarchal realm and the deconstruction of myths. Reporting the same to Melanie, Finn promulgates, I quote, "I buried the swan near the Queen. Do you know that was kind of me? I suppose I thought they would be company for one another." End of quote. It's noticeable that Finn gains self-confidence after burying the swan and seems to be more determined after challenging the Victorian tenets. He buries the swan, the emblem of Uncle Philip's patriarchal authority, with the Queen who personifies the Victorian past with its ideologies. Subsequently, Finn cuts with the old dogmatic values and assumes his role as the new postmodern man. Performance plays an important role in the division of gender roles and in the acquisition of gender identities, since identity is assured through the stabilizing concepts of sex, gender, and sexuality. It's appealing that Carter reuses the same Greek myth in both the Magic Toy Shop and Nights at the Circus, but with a feminist postmodern revision of the definitions of gender that goes in parallel with the characters' performances and identities too. Carter's approach to gender is inextricable from her exploration of identity and how these are constructed textually, historically,